Welcome to the Global Pulse, a short video series where our experts break down a trending topic in international business and why it matters to you.
Since COP26, you might be thinking about the daily carbon footprint you exact on the planet. And one thing I'm going to encourage all of us to think about is the carbon footprint of our daily or weekly wine consumption. When you think about the environment and wine, you might be thinking about pesticides, fertilizers, maybe irrigation where that's allowed. But in fact, 50 to 68% of carbon emissions associated with wine come from packaging and transport. Now, why is that? Well, we mostly ship wine around in bottles. And bottles take a lot of energy to manufacture, and they're also not that efficient to ship because of the shape of them. So the volume of the box of a case of wine and a container that has a lot of wine in it is actually pretty inefficient. We make a bottle once, we rarely reuse it, and in the United States, we don't recycle it. Now, in other countries like the Netherlands, they recycle about 90% of their glass bottles, but in the US, it's more like 25 or 30%. Let's talk about that bottle, though. The weight of the bottle is immense, and there are some reasons for that. First of all, for sparkling wines, the bottles have to be heavier because there are bubbles inside, there's CO2. And so we need a heavier bottle to contain that. But what we need is about an 800 gram bottle, and most of the sparkling wine bottles are 900 grams and up. Now that's nothing compared to what's happening in still wines. In still wines, you can have a bottle that's as light as 450 grams. But what we see is more and more winemakers opt for heavier bottles that are even as heavy as a kilogram. And that's because they think that us, the consumers, actually judge the quality of the wine when we pick it up and we hold it in the store. So the weight of the bottle actually gives us a sense that the wine is higher quality. So, word to the wise, the weight of the bottle has nothing to do with the quality of wine inside. And in fact, you can imagine that if a winery has the reputation of having a great wine, they don't need to play these kind of tricks. So what's the wine industry doing? First of all, there are wineries looking at lightening up the bottles. There's a movement toward that. There's also some writers who are really pushing the notion to reveal the weight of the bottle. So for instance, Dave McIntyre with the Washington Post is starting now to list the bottle weight on all of his reviews so that consumers can understand, just a smidge into the environmental impact of individual bottles of wine they might buy. And you could talk to your retailer and say, hey, I'm really focused on bottles that don't weigh as much because of the carbon footprint. So could you actually keep an eye on that as well? The other thing that's happening is that wineries there are a couple movements toward different types of packages. So Garçon Wines is actually looking at some PET packaging that is what almost looks like a slice of a bottle. So it's flat, so you don't have all that empty space when you ship the wine around, and it's recyclable. There's also a movement toward packaging wine in cans. Gotham is doing that. And they are also shipping wines in kegs to restaurants to reduce the carbon footprint. You ship a huge keg of wine instead of a lot of small bottles. There's also a store, Borough Wines in London, which is recycling bottles by standardizing the bottle size. So, New Year's resolutions. Try to buy local. Buy from your local winery because the carbon footprint of that is going to be much, much smaller. And second of all, look at that wine review and start to see if you can start shifting your consumption toward lower bottle weights. And try wine in a can. You never know. The container really tells us very little about the quality of wine inside, so give it a try.